January 21st, 2010. A date that changed nothing and everything. On that morning, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that barely made the evening news. Yet today, that single ruling has turned American elections into a business worth billions. A machine built on unlimited money, anonymous donors, and ads that never stop. But here's the twist. The decision won. By every legal measure, it succeeded. The court said, money is speech. Corporations are people. And spending unlimited, untraceable spending is protected. The result? A system where a handful of billionaires can drown out millions of voters, where a super PAC can raise more in a week than a candidate does in a year, where the price of a Senate seat now rivals a small country's GDP. So how did we get here? The answer is not what you expect. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a villain. It's a logic that seemed reasonable at the time, and then spiraled out of control. This is the story of how one ruling turned democracy into a marketplace, and why, 15 years later, the only thing that's changed is the price tag. A single check, written in a boardroom, not a campaign office. It buys 30 seconds of airtime in a swing state, and no one has to say where the money came from. That is the reality of American elections today. But it didn't start that way. On January 21st, 2010, the Supreme Court handed down the Citizens United decision. Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote the majority opinion. The ruling struck down caps on independent political spending by corporations and unions. The logic: money is speech. Therefore, limiting it violates the First Amendment. In the aftermath, a new creature was born, the super PAC. These political action committees can raise and spend unlimited sums as long as they don't coordinate directly with a candidate. But coordination is a blurry line. Wealthy donors now funnel billions into elections through these vehicles. Voters have a right to know who is spending, but the system makes it easy to hide. Many now see overturning the decision as the only way to rein in the influence. Yet the machine keeps running. One ruling, one quiet morning in January, and the floodgates opened. But how did one decision create an entirely new kind of political weapon? A super PAC is a legal fiction with a single purpose: to spend unlimited money on political ads. It can raise a fortune from a single corporation, a union, or a billionaire. But here's the trick: the donor's name never appears on the spending report. Instead, the money flows through a shell non-profit, a social welfare group that doesn't have to disclose its contributors. The super PAC then reports the non-profit as the source. The public sees a bland name: Americans for Prosperity, or Patriots for Freedom, not the actual person writing the check. Therefore, the system is built on a lie. The Supreme Court said in Citizens United that independent spending is free speech and voters have a right to know who is speaking. Yet the very vehicles created after that decision, super PACs, are designed to hide the speakers. A single check from one donor can fund a barrage of attack ads that saturate your television, your phone, your mailbox. You see the message, but you never see the messenger. This secrecy isn't a bug. It's the feature that makes the machine run. Wealthy interests can shape elections without accountability, without consequence. The money flows, the ads run, and the voters are left in the dark. Yet the real scandal isn't just the money, it's who's allowed to hide behind it. Subscribe to uncover how money shapes democracy. A single donor writes a check. No name, no receipt. The money vanishes into a super PAC. Days later, attack ads flood your screen. You never see the signature. That's the system now. After Citizens United, the floodgates opened. Wealthy individuals and corporations pour staggering sums into super PACs. These entities exist for one purpose: unlimited political spending, but the donor's identity, often hidden behind shell groups with benign names: Americans for Prosperity, Priorities USA Action. The real source stays in the shadows. Consider this. A handful of billionaires now dominate election spending. Their checks buy airtime, robocalls, digital blitzes. They shape the message you hear, but you don't know who they are. The law does not force full disclosure, so the ads run, the votes are cast, and the money flows, untraceable. Voters have a right to know which wealthy interests are pulling the strings. Yet the system keeps them in the dark. The result? A democracy where influence is invisible. But what happens when voters have no idea who's funding the ads they see? You sit down to watch the evening news, but before the first story, an ad hits you. A grainy photo, a menacing voice, a claim stripped of context, then another, and another. By the time the broadcast ends, you've seen the same attack ad 6 times. You haven't heard a single policy proposal. That is the reality of a post-Citizens United election. On January 21st, 2010, the Supreme Court removed limits on independent spending by corporations and unions. Super PACs were born the same year, legal shells that exist only to pour unlimited cash into advertising. And they do. Billions of dollars flood the airwaves, but the money doesn't buy debate. It buys repetition. It buys fear. Attack ads dominate because they work. A 30-second spot can define a candidate before they even speak. A single line, repeated enough, becomes truth. Substance is expensive. Nuance doesn't fit in 15 seconds. So the airwaves fill with noise, loud, negative, and designed to drown out anything real. Voters have a right to know who is spending. But the system hides the source. A super PAC can be funded by one wealthy donor, and the ad never carries a name. You see the message, you never see the messenger, and the system is designed to make sure no one can escape the noise. The only way to stop the machine is to overturn Citizens United. That's the argument you hear from every reformer, every watchdog, every politician who swears they'll fix the system. But here's the problem. The decision itself was built to last. Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion as a free speech case. Therefore, any attempt to reverse it must argue that money is not speech, a position the current court has already rejected. So the machine keeps running. Since that January morning in 2010, super PACs have become the default tool for the ultra-wealthy. A single donor can now write a check for $10 million, no name required, no receipt filed. The money flows through shell groups with patriotic names, and the ads flood your screen. You never see the source, you only feel the weight. Voters have a right to know who is spending. That's the law's own language. But the law also says you can't stop them. Therefore, the only real hope is a constitutional amendment. A process so difficult it has happened only 27 times in over 2 centuries. And even then, the money would find a new channel. So the question hangs in the air. But is there any real hope for change in a system this broken? The $10 billion election industry doesn't sell candidates, it sells access. Every ad you see, every robocall you ignore, every mailbox stuffed with glossy attack mailers, that's a transaction. Wealthy donors write checks to super PACs, and super PACs buy the airwaves. But the real cost isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in trust. Voters know the game, they feel it. A 2020 poll found that nearly 80% of Americans believe big money controls politics, yet the machine keeps running. Because the machine doesn't need your vote, it needs your attention. And attention is cheap when you can spend unlimited cash. Here's the contradiction. The same Supreme Court decision that opened the floodgates, Citizens United, January 21, 2010, was built on a promise of free speech. Justice Kennedy wrote that independent expenditures do not corrupt. But a decade later, the result is a system where a single donor can outspend 1,000 voters, where candidates spend more time dialing for dollars than debating policy, where the voter becomes a spectator in their own democracy. The machine is efficient, it's profitable, but it's hollow, and the only way to stop it is to overturn Citizens United. Yet that requires a Congress funded by the very system it would dismantle, so the loop tightens. The answer might leave you questioning who really runs America. On January 21, 2010, the Supreme Court handed billionaires the keys to the White House. Citizens United struck down limits on corporate and union spending in elections. One decision, 5 votes. And suddenly, money was speech. The ruling didn't just open a door, it tore down the walls. Super PACs emerged within months, allowing wealthy donors to pour unlimited cash into attack ads, robocalls, and digital blitzes. You see a 30-second spot during the Super Bowl. What you don't see is the single check that paid for it. A fortune laundered through a shell group with no name attached. But here's the trap. The very freedom that super PACs claimed, the right to spend without restraint, became the system's fatal flaw. Voters lost trust. They saw the same handful of billionaires funding both sides, hedging their bets. The machine grew efficient, but it grew hollow. Elections became a $10 billion business where the product wasn't a candidate, it was access. The lesson: when you let money speak louder than people, the people stop listening. The same logic that turned votes into commodities is now reshaping another industry. You think you know, one where the hidden monopoly is even older and the price tag even higher. Stay curious, stay critical.